Welcome to our conversation around communication. This particular module, again, is a very skill-driven module. And what I've done is set out some basic theory for you, but then I want to migrate our conversation into some strategies you can use as you emerge as a manager and leader to make yourself promotable and more effective in the organization. So we're going to deal with communication issues and some solutions, and then we'll migrate into the conversation around leader as a communicator. The functions of communication are very, very straightforward. That you have this flash of brilliance, and communication is the way that you translate your flash of brilliance to others, and you guide their behavior. You help motivate them towards a course of action. You can use communication to emote or transmit the emotion that you feel around an issue, and you can provide critical information for a decision. That sounds like a very simple process, but as you've seen in your courses on communication, this very simple model gets very, very complex. We have three dynamics at play. One is you, and again, you have an idea or a message you want to send. Then you have to send it through some means or channel to the receiver, and in that channel, all kinds of noise takes place, and we're going to talk a bit about some of that noise and the barriers. And then you have the receiver and how they're perceiving the message that you're sending to them. So the channel is a medium in which we send the message. It can be very formal within an organizational structure, and it can be very informal. And on our conversation in networks, we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about the informal side of communication and managing that so that you can be far more effective. So on the formal side, you as a leader can communicate down in the organization. You can communicate up in the organization to your boss, and you can communicate with your peers. So a nice, straightforward dynamic. Again, once you get humans involved in the process, it gets far more complicated. So when you bring people in, we have three ways that we tend to communicate, and one is oral, one is written, and one is nonverbal. On the oral side of communication, there's some real advantages to it. It's quick. You can look someone in the eye, send your message to them, and you can convey emotion. The disadvantage is sometimes we're not clearly understood in what we're saying. On the written side, literally within the last 20 years, it's gone beyond just sending out a memo on paper to digital communication. The advantages of having written communication is it gives us an audit trail or a record of what our thinking was or what we communicated, and it tends to have a sense of logic attached to it. The downside is it takes time to construct something in writing, and we don't have the opportunity for feedback. It's a one-way form of communication. Nonverbal communication, we're going to spend some time talking about that also. This is a subtlety. It's not something that's written, but it's the messages that we're sending to the people that are receiving it. The advantage of it is it helps support. It's a tool to reinforce our written and oral communication, and it allows us to really intensify the feelings that we have behind a particular message and the emotion. The disadvantage is we can be misread, that people can not understand our body language or our tone of voice, and they put a whole new different interpretation on the message that we're sending. Within an organization, we have small groups, and again, when we have our conversation on networks, we're going to dig deeper into this. One approach is a very chain type approach, where you have one person communicates to another, to another, to another, and the message flows through that chain of connection. Many of you tend to operate in a wheel form of communication where you're at the center and you're communicating out to the people on the wheel. And we'll talk again in our conversation on networks how that can burn you out. And then there's an all-channel approach towards communication, and this is where all of the people in your group have the ability to communicate and connect with each other. This is the most desired state in a world that's very complex, that's very information rich, and when you have a workforce that likes to be involved, an all-channel approach is something that we want to be paying attention to. So when you take a look at the different advantages to all of these, this chart is something that you can use very strategically when you set up your communication channels. That when you have a chain, again, it gives you high accuracy because a message is communicated very clearly. It can move very fast, and it's something that's very worthwhile. When you want to get into something that is clearly understood and that people buy into it, take a look at using the all-channel approach. There you see the member satisfaction, or your team members can get excited, can get passionate about what's going on. So when you take a look at the pluses and minuses of setting up your communication within your team, I would suggest that you try to move to an all-channel approach when you have an opportunity. Something that's critical for us to be paying attention to now is, back 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was called the grapevine, the back fence communication within the organization. Right now, this rumor flow within organizations is very, very intense. Social media has added a whole new dimension to the rumors that can be used to attack your organization and can be used to attack you as a leader. It's also very interesting that when you work with executives or with managers who are responsible for driving change in an organization, oftentimes the way that people want to maintain the status quo will try to blunt the effectiveness of that manager or that change agent is to start rumors, to place innuendos, and they can get incredibly vicious. I worked with one individual that was at a very senior level in an organization, and there was an allegation of inappropriate behavior with one of his colleagues. Absolutely no basis in reality, but that deflected him from his job for almost a month while it got all sorted out. So some of the characteristics of these rumors is that there's no control over them, that they're perceived by most employees as being believable and reliable, that they're used as a tool by the person that's starting the rumors to drive their agenda. The result is people's desire for information in situations. That, again, as a manager, we need to be communicating more and more and more and more. And the more effective we are at communicating, the less rumors are going to be out there because people have facts and data in their hands. When change is occurring and people don't know what the end state looks like, you're going to see all kinds of rumors starting to float around. And people use them out of anxiety. So these are very human conditions, and as a manager, as a leader, we have to be smart in managing this informal rumor side of organizations and not just assume that because they're not real, we can just discard them. Some of the consequences of negative rumors in an organization, it can disrupt our organization, and the way that we can manage those disruptions is to be very, very clear about our timelines. And again, over-explain what is going on so that people are aware of what's going on and what's happening. And again, we can use them effectively within our organization because they move very, very quickly. So again, discuss what's going on, be as transparent as you can. The reality is, in today's world of social media and fast communication, the messages are going to move whether you want them to or not. So how do we make a choice on how we go about communicating and which communication channel we use? A very, very good channel is one that provides the receiver a lot of clues, both very, very direct and subtle on what's going on. It's one that facilitates rapid feedback so that people involved have a flow of information both ways, and one that's very personal to the context. This particular model is very helpful to you from a strategic standpoint, that when you take a look at it, the least rich channel we can use are emails, memos, pre-recorded speeches, conversations like I'm doing here on tape. The most effective, the richest form of communication is still face-to-face. My sense is we're being seduced by technology and we're eliminating the face-to-face communication that takes place within the workforce. I had an opportunity to have a conversation with an executive this week. And at the end of that conversation, my suggestion was that the greatest gift that this executive can give to his team as they're driving significant change in the organization is his presence. That nothing can substitute for that eyeball-to-eyeball, face-to-face conversation with your leader. So again, there comes a time where you have to move something fast. You move down to the less rich channels because it's critically necessary, but we want to be strategic so that when we have critical messages, we take the time to have these face-to-face conversations. There's also something that's occurring in organizations that there's an awareness that, particularly because of my generation, starting to leave organizations in waves, that as we go out the door, the knowledge that we have is going out the door with us. And organizations are starting to set up knowledge management systems where the knowledge that people have is now being digitized and stored so that it has access throughout the whole organization. One healthcare organization I was working with is doing something incredibly cool, that they have some of the better surgeons within their system, and the surgeons are now doing videos of the surgeries that are taking place, and they're talking through their thinking as they're performing that surgery. That is then recorded and placed in a knowledge management system so that other surgeons throughout that entire system have access to the best practices. I think that is absolutely brilliant. We have access to technology today. There's no reason why we can't be very, very aggressive in setting up knowledge management systems. Other things you can be doing is writing case studies on actions that were taken within your organization, have them written. We're working with an organization now that is doing both the written case study, but then they're doing short video recordings of some of the key players that were involved in that particular issue that was worked through. So again, future managers, current managers can tie into that knowledge management system and learn from what's going on. So why is it we have such a problem? The problem is that we're human beings and we have a straightforward set of communication models, but then people mess it all up. So you see that people will start to filter the information that they're sending out. Depending on the world that you live in, it could be spin. There's a whole message management. There's other types that it's called. So people distort the message. Then on the receiver side, people tend to hear what they want to hear. So they have a filter on their side of interpreting the message that's sent. And today we also have an issue with information overload. There's just far too much stuff flowing out there, so people get overwhelmed. We also have this evil thing called emotions, so that can distort the message. One thing that's concerning me today is some organizations are working so hard to make sure that no one's feelings are hurt that the messages are becoming so politically correct that we're removing the emotion from it, and it's becoming a very mechanical, very filtered process. So emotions, the lack of is a barrier, and then again, too much intensity is a barrier. Language is a barrier, that people interpret different words differently. And then there's the ability to understand the message that's taking place. So there's, as a manager, you're going to have people with different skill sets on being able to comprehend what's going on, and it's going to take some effort to make sure everybody's on board. And then we layer in, particularly here in California, where we have a very rich cross-cultural setting, but that also creates barriers. So again, semantics, the connotation of certain words in different societies, different perceptions, all these things get in the way. That one thing that I would encourage you to do is assume that there's differences in how people are receiving the message until you get validation. And then practice being empathetic. So here's some other ideas for you to think about as you communicate with people in other cultures. Let's move into a conversation around how will you be perceived as a leader within the organization. That you have to start to think about the language that you use. It's grossly unfair, but in a human group, there are certain markers that denote where you stand in that group. So if you want to be perceived as a leader, you have to manage your messages so that your marker is one of somebody that can be trusted and that people aspire to follow. So the language we use is power language. Our tone of voice is managed. Our nonverbal is managed. And then how we give and receive feedback is very, very strategic. So the language that we use, our goal is to use inclusive language. Oftentimes there's an us versus them form of language. I'll see that in almost any context I go to. Groups create their own buzzwords, their own language that only people in that inner circle understand, and those of us in academics are probably the greatest offender of that. We have the ability of taking a relatively simple complex and making it incomprehensible. And then as a leader, we want language that's inclusive. Again, clear language that's understood by everyone. And you watch effective leaders, they're able to take the complex and communicate it in a very straightforward way. The tone of voice that we use has a significant impact. Again, I've been doing some work in healthcare, and it's absolutely fascinating in that one study that how a surgeon explained the risk associated with the surgery was having a direct effect on whether or not a malpractice suit took place if the surgery had a bad outcome. So tone of voice matters. The challenge we have is we can't hear our own tone of voice. So again, recording either digitally or on camera so that you get some sense and some awareness of the tone of voice that you're using. How we dress matters. We have a number of books written on power dressing so that you're projecting the appropriate image. How you stand, we're going to do a whole module, a whole conversation on executive presence, and then our facial expression. And again, if you have the opportunity, put a mirror on your desk if you're doing a lot of phone calls so that you can see your face as you're communicating on the phone, and it'll help you direct the right message. Learning how to give and receive feedback is a mark of a true leader. Understand that it is the receiver of the message that is the most important part of feedback. So you want to seek out information and feedback and have a reputation of one that's doing so. Sir Alex Ferguson, who was a Manchester United force, talked about listening should be a lifelong activity so that you can continue to learn and grow. We get different types of feedback. One is appreciation feedback, one is coaching, and one is evaluation. So again, when you're giving feedback, be very clear that this is what you're trying to accomplish. If you're receiving it, understand what's going on. Why is it that we tend to not be very good at listening to feedback? One is, and the largest, is our relationship with the person that's giving the feedback. That can get in the way. The way that we can fix it is becoming more skilled at separating the message from the messenger, and understand that we're having a human reaction to what's going on, and beware of that tape that's running in our mind. So the type of feedback that you can give, again, could be looking back. You can go to others and say, what did you observe about me in this particular situation so I can understand better? And then looking forward, what advice can you give to me so that I can implement the changes that you're recommending? I submit a challenge to you in dealing with feedback. Probably going to make you pretty uncomfortable. But seek feedback from somebody you don't particularly like. And seek feedback from somebody that's not much like you. And these folks are going to be the folks that can push your hot button. And they're also those that are going to give you the most candid feedback that you can get. So to wrap it up, effective communication is very, very hard work. It's also critical to you accomplishing your goals and the organization's goals. And really what's more important from my perspective is your skill as a communicator is going to drive how you stand in an organization to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So thanks for listening.